Good morning. I'm Dr. Edgar Stewart, and I will be your presenter / moderator this morning. Thank you all for joining us. Looks like we're having folks come in, so we're going to just give people another 2 or 3 minutes to start, and then we will begin shortly. If you can hear me, please just type either in the chat box or in the questions to let us know that you can hear us. And while you're waiting, I'd also like to direct your attention to the handouts box, where there are 2 handouts. One is a copy of the slide presentation in notes mode, and the second is our guiding principles for education, which we'll be covering in some level of detail later on in our presentation. So if you'll just bear with us for a couple of minutes while we give a few people some time to get in, and we will start in just a couple of minutes. While we're waiting, I see that folks have acknowledged that they can hear me, so that's great. Again, like I said, we'll be starting in just a minute or so, and please check out the handouts that are there. You can download them, direct your attention to that. There are 2 handouts for you. Okay, let's get started. Good morning. So as I said, this webinar today, we will be consists of 2 parts. The first part from 10:30 a.m. until 12 p.m. will be covering guidance related to COVID-19, topics including free and appropriate public education FAPE, along with IEP service delivery programming, as well as implementing distance learning and hybrid education programming. We also will be showcasing an example of the work of one non-public school and one LEA, and how they've collaborated on the development of the non-public's distance learning plan to serve the LEA students' needs. So that's an exciting portion of our presentation that we'll be covering today. So that's the morning session. Our afternoon session will consist of kind of more of the nuts and bolts of issues related to this kind of COVID-19 epidemic that is the overlay to our kind of normal special education service delivery processes that we all undertake in various forms. So we'll be covering other topics including non-public payment and invoicing, and attendance reporting, safety measures and reporting, as well as transportation. So that session will take place from 1 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. this afternoon. So we'll have a short break for lunch. One more time, I'll just direct folks who have just joined us that there are 2 handouts that you'll see if you click onto the handouts interface, and you can download them. They include both the presentation in notes mode. We'll be sending out the full presentation with the embedded links in there after the after the webinar this afternoon. So you'll have that as well for both part 1 and part 2. And there's also another document, our guiding principles for education, that we'll also be covering. All right, so LaShonda Wilson, who is a member of the non-public monitoring team with me, and I will be presenting. And again, my name is Dr. Edgar Stewart, and we will first jump in to direct your attention to our published guidance. Hopefully, all of you, both on the LEA side or the non-public side, and any other stakeholders who support students with disabilities in non-public settings, hopefully you all have already been to our website, but in the event that you haven't, we have a guidance documents page that houses all of our guidance documents that we have produced. You know, I want to say there's over 25, 30 of those guidance documents over the last 6 months that include health and safety resources, information on educator licensing and any waivers that, you know, apply kind of during this COVID period, as well as looking at, as I said before, the guiding principles for continuous education, responsibilities related to serving students with disabilities, homeless students, English language learners, updates in terms of the enrollment process given this COVID posture, also information about assessment data and accountability, and other educational resources for families. So if you already have not visited this guidance document page on the OSSI website, I encourage you to do so, because there's lots of pertinent information, useful information, and information that, you know, for serving your non-public students is really relevant to kind of make sure that you're aware of, you know, all the requirements and resources that are available to you. So let's jump in. I'm going to turn the presentation over to my colleague, LaShonda Wilson, who will really kind of cover some of the information that's come into us, and we wanted to make sure that we're providing answers to those questions that have come in, and more information to help you all understand kind of OSSI's expectations as it relates to distance learning plans. So I'm going to turn it over to LaShonda at this point.
Thank you, Edgar. Good morning, everyone. Again, as Edgar said, my name is LaShonda Wilson, and I am a non-public program monitor with OSSI. I'll be reviewing with you Q&A guidance in relation to distance learning plans. So starting with our first question, if a non-public school operates in a jurisdiction that is in 100% distance or virtual learning modality, plans to follow suit, and the DC LEA decides to operate in hybrid, in-person, and virtual modality, what is OSSI's expectation regarding the learning modality of the non-public school? So in terms of our answer, it's OSSI's expectation that the non-public school continues to work in collaboration with the LEA on how services will be delivered. This information should also be documented in the non-public school's distance learning plan. So helpful areas for you to view guidance. We have our OSSI guidance, and then also our IDEA Part B provision of FAPE guidance related to remote and blended learning documents for more information on non-public school distance learning plans for continuous education. A couple things to keep in mind for the purposes of this presentation: distance learning and virtual learning are used synonymously. Blending learning is an alternative between distance and in-person environments, and continuous education takes place when both instruction and learning occur seamlessly across different learning environments, including in-person and virtual settings. The next question is, if a DC LEA opts to provide its students with distance learning and a non-public school decides to offer in-person instruction, and a parent wants their child to attend in person at the non-public school, will OSSI object to the student attending in person? Also, will OSSI Division of Student Transportation, or DOT, transport the student? The answer for this question is, if the LEA decides to implement a full-time distance learning model, the decision should not automatically extend to their students attending non-public schools. LEAs and non-public schools should work together to ensure students with disabilities have equal access to educational opportunities provided with their alongside their non-public peers. Equal access may include equally effective alternative access. Should also consider the health and safety of students, families, and school staff. OSSI DOT will continue in its current operating status, but we're looking into any updates that may be needed based on a number of dependencies. So some helpful documents to also be looking at in relation to this question, again, are the OSCE guidance and the IDEA Part B provision of FAPE guidance related to remote and blended learning.
Sorry, just before I go on to the next slide, I just wanted to share with folks, please use the questions box. If you have questions throughout, we'll be checking those. We'll do formal pauses at the end of each of the sections, but certainly feel free at any time to put in any questions that you have, and we'll make sure that we're answering them. Hopefully we can answer them in the content that we're covering in that section. Thank you.
Okay, this next question. Is a distance learning plan required for the 2020-21 school year? The answer here is yes. A distance learning plan is required for all non-public schools that receive OSCE funding, both day and residential schools. So even if you submitted for the 2019-20 school year a distance learning plan to OSCE, we are looking for an updated plan for this school year. The next question is OSCE requiring a standardized distance learning plan, for example, same content sections, formatting, or what have you, to better determine what services will be delivered and the quality of the instruction? The answer here is no. OSCE is not requiring non-public schools to submit a standardized distance plan. However, to ensure the delivery of FAPE to non-public students, non-public schools should collaborate with LEAs to develop distance learning plans that align with LEA plans and with District of Columbia's school year 2020-21 LEA continuous learning and school recovery plan, and the OSCE guiding principles for continuous education. Distance learning plans should be in compliance with the OSCE Certificate of Approval or COA regulations. The next question is in relation to which entities we should be looking for. So which entity, LEA or non-public school, is responsible for providing makeup services, recovery, and compensatory education? And in terms of the answer here, LEA should incorporate into recovery planning the resources and time frames IT teams will be expected to meet to make individualized compensatory education decisions. An individualized determination whether compensatory education services are needed must be made under applicable standards and requirements. LEAs have broad flexibility through the IEP team process to discuss and make individualized determination with regard to what compensatory services are needed and how they should be provided. Compensatory services can come in many forms. So here, please be sure to see our IDEA Part B provision of FAPE guidance related to remote and blended learning as well. Also, keep in mind, LEAs are responsible for ensuring the delivery of services designed to mitigate student regression and address recovery of loss of learning that may have occurred during the school closure or remote blended learning due to COVID-19. And then all students enrolled in their LEAs should also be serviced in this way as well. So be sure to see the OSEP guidance, question A1, in regards to this. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and move into a review of our guidance in relation to the provisions of FAPE.
Sorry, actually, I have a question before that, LaShonda, before we move on.
Yep.
My non-public schools have submitted to me their distance learning plan. Are we to turn them into OSCE, or are they turning them into OSCE themselves? If we are required to turn them into OSCE, who do we submit them to? So in previous webinars and in our guidance documents, what we have directed non-publics to do with their learning plans is submit a copy of them to each of the LEAs whose students they're serving. And again, that should have been a collaborative process to develop that learning plan in the first place. So what we've asked also, though, is that when they're submitting those plans to their LEAs, that they should also be copying, their non-public monitor. So each member of my team, LaShonda Wilson, Tony Lemons, and Sherry Pope Black, are the OSSI non-public program monitors assigned to roughly a third of the non-public schools. So when the non-public schools submitted those documents, the learning plan documents, to LEAs, they should have also submitted them to their assigned monitor. Our contact information is at the end of this presentation. So if you have not, and you're a non-public and you have not submitted those forms, to copy your non-public monitor, feel free to send them to me, and I'll make sure they get to the appropriate non-public monitor. The LEAs don't have to do anything in terms of submitting learning plan information to OSSI. If they have not received those learning plans from their non-public, the first thing they should be doing is reaching out to the non-public to make sure they have that for the 2021 school year. And if they're running into issues or challenges, feel free to reach out to me to assist you all in getting those learning plans for each of the non-publics that serve your students. All right, we've got another question that's come in as well. Does the prior answer mean that LEAs are responsible for providing comp ed and makeup services, or only that the LEA convenes the team to make that determination? LEAs are ultimately responsible for comp ed and makeup services, and the non-public school is an active partner in that process. So hopefully that answers the question. All right, let's move on. Okay, LaShonda.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and pick up again with FAPE requirements. So the first question is, how should non-public schools address the situation where a student does not participate in distance learning after multiple attempts to re-engage and does not complete work packets? The answer here is attendance during the 2020-21 year is required. Students are expected to attend school in accordance with the existing compulsory attendance rules and the non-public school's learning, education method, and scheduled school day and hours. Student absences and session no-shows should be addressed as usual. For instance, here, absences should be documented in service logs. Also be sure to notify the LEA after the required number of absences, so 5 or 10 days. And then also non-public schools are expected to re-engage the students as usual. So see 2020-21 school year attendance guidance, that document as well, which is also going to provide some additional feedback in this regard.
Sorry, before you move on, Yvonne Smith will be talking later on kind of about the nuts and bolts of attendance reporting, really, and this is for, on the non-public side, using the SEAT system, the special education attendance tracking system, COVID-19 specific attendance codes. And you'll also hear from a non-public school and an LEA on how they're working the attendance process in some very creative ways when we get to that section in a bit. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Edgar. And then the next question here is, if non-public schools are accepting tuition, are they required to provide related services? The answer here unanimously is yes. Non-public schools are required to provide all instructional and related services according to students' IEPs. Also not listed here, but another question that has come up for us is, will OSSI require 6 hours school days or a specified amount of direct instruction and 180 total school days during the 2020-21 school year? The COA regulations, particularly 5A 28 DCMR section 2806, require a 180-hour day and 6-hour minimum per day. However, if a non-public school determines that the need to waive those requirements has come about, they should contact OSSI directly for review and approval. Also, please note that non-public schools are already required to submit learning plans to OSSI where their instructional models are outlined, and much like with LEAs, approaches to ensure instructional delivery may impact the school day and how it looks. So any changes to the number of instructional school days provided by a non-public school should be submitted for review and approval by OSSI. The POC here is going to be Juliana Brewster, And then I'd also, advise that you also send that information to Dr. Stewart as well. Okay, and then moving on to our next question in terms of FAPE is if a school, for instance, the IEP team, determines that a student must have a one-to-one or a dedicated aide to access distance learning, they would have to hold an IEP meeting and add it to the IEP as a service for OSSI to pay for it. Is that correct? Could an alternative be to write it in the student's distance learning plan since it's specifically only related to distance learning? But that's a sort of addendum to the IEP rather than a part of the actual document. Is that correct? The answer here is OSSI pays for services prescribed on the student's IEP and not for services indicated on an auxiliary document or services determined by a group of outside individuals as opposed to the IEP team. So pursuant to Chapter 28 of Title 5A of the District of Columbia Municipal Regulations, 5A28 DCMR Section 2821.15, and the authority granted in the City Administrator's Order 24, April 13th, 2020, and upon written request by LEAs, OSSI will continue to remit payment for tuition, related services, and residential services in the 2020-21 school year until otherwise advised by OSSI. So if an IEP team is making decisions about the services a student is to receive as part of their special education and related services, such decisions should be documented through the IEP process. Again, here, your source document is the IDEA Part B provision of FAPE document in relation to remote and blended learning. I'll go ahead and, go ahead, Dr.
No, please, go ahead, LaShonda.
Okay, I'll go ahead and hand it back over to you to introduce our next set of presenters and then any other questions that may have come up in the chat.
Okay, great. Thank you, LaShonda.
Mm-hmm.
If we determine, this is another question that's come in. If we determine based on an individual basis that some students are unable to participate in 100% of related services due to disabilities and distance learning limitations, and it is outlined in the individual learning plans, is this okay? What we would say is that if those services are on the IEP, it's OSSI's expectation that those services are delivered. Should there be, as in any other time, whether it's COVID related or not, in any other time, if the IEP team determines, and that IEP team would consist of the parent, the LEA, and members of the non-public school staff as well. If the IEP team determines that services are, not either warranted or not indicated in the current situation, they should be documented in the context of an IEP meeting, as well as outlined in a PWN as well. So it's not, it cannot be limited to changes made in individual learning plans. It must be documented in the standard way through the IEP formal process. All right. I'm going to pause here for just a few more minutes to see if any other questions come in before we get into the next section. So there was a follow-up question to that last question. Does this mean that we would have to amend the IEP to make changes on the services? So in relation to my previous guidance that any changes to related services, due to challenges in the distance learning environment, yes, they need to be made in the context of an IEP meeting, and the IEP needs to be amended to reflect those service changes. Next question, does that apply also to reducing the amount of service on an IEP under the current distance learning, or just to not providing a service at all? Yes, it also applies to reducing, or in other cases, maybe increasing the amount of services. Again, all of this really looks the same as it would look outside of this COVID posture, where formal changes to a student's IEP are reflected in an IEP amendment and a PWN. I'll give a couple more minutes to see if anybody else has any questions. Someone makes a comment, but these changes are temporary while we're in distance learning due to the inability to sit in front of a screen and actively participate in services. Yeah, while that may be true, formal changes to the IEP do need to be made through the normal IEP process. All right, I'm gonna, in the interest of time, to make sure that our two esteemed speakers from Inspired Teaching Demonstration School and Kennedy Krieger Schools have enough time to speak. We'll come back at the end. We'll have some more time for questions. So whatever we don't get to now, we should be able to get to. Also, in the interest of time, I have up here the guiding principles for continuous education. You have that handout. If you go to your handout section and look, through, there are two handouts that include the guiding principles for continuous education. So I have it here up on the screen, and I'm not going to go through these with any real kind of detail, but you have this information, and the basis of the talk that both Patrick Say, who is vice president at Kennedy Krieger Schools, and Samantha Lincoln, who is at Inspired Teaching Demonstration Schools. We'll be kind of getting into some of these as we go through each of the sections. All right. So first, I would like to turn over the presentation to Patrick Say, who, as I said, is Vice President Kennedy Krieger Schools, and he's going to kind of talk about the development and the collaboration with Inspired Teaching Demonstration School for the learning plan for one of the students coming from Inspired Teaching. Patrick?
Thank you, Edgar. Good morning, everyone. So to start to share, I just want to recognize the fact that as the non-public perspective, or my perspective, is probably similar to many of your perspectives as we navigated this new normal that we found ourselves in the spring of 2020. In the early phase, I like to think of that phase as the make it work phase. There we were all presented with an unexpected situation that we kind of had to make work in whatever way made sense for the students that we served. So initially, many of us were probably readjusting our educational offerings so that they could be delivered in a learning management system, finding ways to connect, put those systems up. We shifted to related services being delivered via telehealth. That created its own set of unique circumstances for all of us, whether it was consents, licensure issues, transitioning to the appropriate level of services. I think in the conversation that just occurred with the questions that came up, many of us found ourselves looking at those services and figuring out how we need to ramp up the services for the provision in a telehealth model, because what was appropriate in a building face-to-face may or may not be appropriate in a telehealth environment. So there were a lot of changes and a lot that we were trying to have to figure out, and we were doing it in real time. While we were doing it in real time, again, as many of you know, so were our families. This was an unexpected and unfamiliar shift for all of them. So in those initial phases, a lot of those conversations were about check-ins with the family. What are their needs? What specifically is happening? How can we support them? How can we collaborate and connect with our LEA partners in meeting those needs of the families? A main focus, obviously, in the early make it work phase was being sensitive to where the parents were, where the students were, what this change meant for all of them, and again, sort of like addressing their basic needs. And that looked different for every student and every family, because each one presented sort of with unique needs. And we found, again, not really any different prior to this closure, but we found that the best way to tackle this head on was through communication and collaboration with our LEA partners. Different circumstances presented themselves. The one that sort of came to mind with a particular student at one of our programs was a student that, as we were approaching ESY, the family had not participated in ESY in the past, but we felt like, especially because of the current circumstances, this would be something that would be beneficial to the student. So in reaching out to Samantha and the Inspired team, we just started really talking about what would that look like, and what could we do? Because again, I think we faced some of the same questions that everyone else was facing in terms of the parents were asking for less potentially than what we were offering. And we needed answers in terms of what's okay with less, what does less look like, and what would the LEA be comfortable with? So we did all that in collaboration with Samantha, who, as with all of our LEAs, was extremely supportive in working through the process, understanding the unique circumstances that we were all in, and working collaboratively to address those needs, again, with the focus being on what was in the best interest of the students. And then as we've finished the fall, and finished summer and moved into the fall, the focus then kind of shifted. And again, I think I'm preaching to the choir, but the focus kind of shifted to sort of a back to business as usual phase, or as much as possible in this COVID edition. Now that we're in it for the longer haul, we wanted to refocus on high expectations. What does grading look like? How are we making sure that there's engagement? Do we have the rigor that we need? How do we have to change our schedules and provide a school day that looks more consistent with what things look like prior to the closure? Again, within reason, again, working within the platforms digitally that we have to work in still in this environment. And at Kennedy, we really looked at sort of modifying our attendance policy so that we could capture uniquely both aspects. So we know that engagement is more important as we go into the back to business as usual phase, but we also know that our families continue to struggle with all the things that come with the current COVID posture that we're in now. So we looked at an attendance policy that captures both daily attendance, that being the students' attendance in live synchronous instruction, but as well as we created a system for capturing weekly attendance as well. And that's a way for us to reflect on the work that the students may or may not be doing during that synchronous environment. So maybe they're coming to coaching sessions or targeted instruction sessions, or the amount of asynchronous work that they're doing in their Google Classrooms or their learning management platforms and things of that nature. So that attendance policy and process allows us to give a more comprehensive picture to our LEA partners, so that when we have to come to the table to talk about engagement, we can include more robust data in that conversation. And then again, we just continue to support the families. We know that engagement is more important now that we're doing this for a longer period of time. But again, we still know that there's things that the families are struggling with that we need to be able to support. Things like Zooming into their homes and being sensitive to that matter, their schedules, working from home, tech needs where they have multiple children that are trying to access and that they're trying to support at the same time. And in order to meet the parents where they are and figure out solutions, we just continue to communicate and collaborate with our partners at the LEAs to meet those needs. So that's the non-public
Oh,
perspective.
I'm so sorry. I was on mute. I was talking for about 30 seconds there. Thank you very much, Patrick. That was, it was informative. And if you could just talk a little bit more about the, the modification of Kennedy Krieger's attendance policy to really kind of help support students where they're at. I thought it was a really nice example of, being able to take into account all that families have going on. Students, not balancing kind of the high expectations, for delivery of services along with, whatever student, or family challenges that arise. That I think that would be great because it's a really creative example.
Sure. So what we did is on the, I guess the front end is the daily attendance, which is reflected simply in the student's attendance in live synchronous instruction. So whether there's multiple periods of that, a single period of that, if the student is present for that live synchronous instruction, then they are present for the day. If they are not present for at least one of those synchronous sessions, again, depending on the total number of synchronous sessions, then they would be considered absent for that day. But in addition to that daily attendance during the live synchronous instruction, we've created these weekly grids that take into account, it varies program by program and to some degree classroom by classroom. And basically we ask the teachers to look at what are the measures that you're using to determine whether or not the student is engaged. So it may be work that they're completing in a Google Classroom. It may be participation in targeted instruction. If you have a student that for whatever reason isn't engaged digitally at all, but you're maybe mailing home work for the student and that work is coming back, then those grades get factored in. In addition to that, we count the related service sessions in that part of the grid as well. So if they attended their related service sessions, that can count towards their weekly attendance values. And their weekly attendance values will give them a value of yes, they participated or no, they didn't participate, which works out to a percentage. And based on that percentage, then they get a weekly attendance value that's reported out as either present, limited present, or absent. And again, that's just based on the amount of additional work that they're doing. And the reason we came up with that sort of approach was just because, again, we know that there are many families that are struggling because of their own schedules or because of technology issues or things of that nature, that as much as we want them to be participating in every live synchronous session that they can or we offer, we know that they can't always. So we wanted to be able to provide a more rounded picture of that family and that student's engagement in the instruction that we're offering.
Great, thank you, Patrick. Yeah, like I said, that was a really nice example of being creative in terms of looking at student attendance, while being mindful of the whole student supports and what students may need and families may need to access learning. Let's see. I don't see any specific questions at this time that we would direct to Patrick. So I'm going to shift now to turn it over to our LEA partner, Samantha Lincoln, who is at Inspire Teaching Demonstration School, to kind of give you the LEA perspective on this. Samantha.
Good morning. So, I'm grateful to have the opportunity to speak today because I think, like a lot of LEAs, there's a lack of control in this situation, and a lot of people who get into this work are type A personalities. And particularly for our kids at non-publics, it requires even a higher degree of communication, I think, than we normally have with our partners to figure out what's going on and all the different moving pieces to make sure kids are maintaining access and that programs are sufficiently individualized. So one of the first things that came out of this process for us as we were getting up and running in the spring is we wanted to know exactly what our students were getting and what does it look like throughout the day, and that should be explicitly written out. So whenever I had questions about what a non-public had provided, because some of the actual template plans are a little vague, and I think there's a reason and a good purpose for that. But when the plans were vague and kind of set out principles or guiding ideas, I would just reach out to our partners and say, okay, but what about my kid? You know, where are they on Monday at 2 o'clock? What does Tuesday at 10 a.m. look like? And wanting to have that conversation. Also keeping in mind that a lot of our non-public partners are dealing with some of the same technological issues that we might be. So for this year, for example, I know some of our partners were waiting to send us schedules because they couldn't print it from PowerSchool and they were having difficulty with their teams, their IT. And I said, it doesn't have to be pretty, just type it up for me. What does each day look like? And that really helps to effectuate things when they know they don't have to give kind of a perfect finished product. What I'm looking for is the information. One thing that was particularly helpful with the Kennedy Krieger team and with their model is having a, and students can have up to 20 different guardians for Google Classroom, which means LEAs can have a guardian code to actually look at the work, the assignments your student is completing, the quality of work they produced. I know that if in my own school at Inspired, I have some students who are clicking turn in after only writing their name and just moving on with their day, that might be happening at non-publics too. So having the opportunity to directly keep an eye on work completion and work quality has really helped with the feedback on student work and knowing how each of my non-public partners is approaching that with our students. Another thing to keep in mind is just making sure that the non-public partners have the OSSI guidance and ensuring a shared understanding. This was really important back in spring, and I think was important at the beginning of this year as we were getting up and running. A lot of our partners work in Maryland, and DC has been on the leading edge of guidance. So DC might come out with something, and they're still waiting on Maryland to speak to the same issue, and just having that shared understanding of, well, let's put something in place that meets the DC guidance while we wait for Maryland, knowing that that could change. So things like attendance could change, how IEPs or schedules are written could change, but knowing that there's going to be an interim plan that's compliant with the DC guidance has been incredibly helpful. We do ask our LEAs to give us, or our non-public partners to give us a heads up after 4 days of absences. Most of them actually do let us know sooner, which is really helpful, particularly at this point in the year where even 1 or 2 consecutive absences at the beginning of the year could mean families don't know school started, families don't have a hotspot or internet access. And so making sure you establish those boundaries with your non-public partner, and that may be family specific as well, which is another reason that, again, I think it makes sense that some of the templates or plans are more vague. Some students, it may be fine to have that conversation after 5 absences, but based on family history, some students, you might need to have it after the 2nd absence. In terms of communication and collaboration, again, I do think it was more important for us now. In some ways, it's business as usual and just picking up with the same critical collaboration as we always have. But in other ways, we need to have even more nuance. So for example, if mom or dad was sick or grandma was sick and the non-public partner hears that, that's not something I might have always known when we were in normal, traditional in-person schooling. In this context, it might mean there's a change of care at home, or there's more difficulty getting the student engaged and participating daily. So that's information that I am asking for now and that our partners are sharing with us. Those sort of nuanced details that might mean more now that students are learning from home. Another thing that we did as an LEA was look at our last progress reports. So those last progress reports from the spring to see what were the goals that couldn't be introduced in the distance model at that time with what it looked like, as Patrick said, kind of the make it work model, or areas where the student did not make progress, and starting to set up those meetings with non-publics and families saying, well, what are we going to do differently now to make sure that that goal can be addressed, or does it need to be adjusted to promote progress now that we've had more time to think about this and get it up and running. In terms of access to technology, we did provide all of our equipment and internet to non-public students, and we did have to collaborate with non-publics there as well because each of them are using different systems. So for example, making sure that families had the support for signing into Canvas versus signing into Google Classroom and making sure that that was compatible with our systems. And then whole school supports, we collaborate and communicate on understanding the context of each student's needs and challenges so we can identify solutions. So one thing that we've been doing in alignment with the OSSI guidance is adding more parent training to IEPs where that's appropriate and necessary. And then also partnering with non-publics on the technology training. So making sure that parents have whatever information they need and families have whatever information they need to get students up and running. In some cases, that has included one of our non-public partners actually created this beautiful 15-page guide to Canvas with screenshots and click here and then do this for every step for a parent who felt they weren't particularly tech savvy. Whereas our team maybe took the lead on some more home BIPs and behavior plans because some of our non-public partners, they just haven't done a lot of parent training in the past, or that's not what their practitioners are really geared for. And also noting that some of them, while this might be the most high needs student in our population, it's par for the course in theirs. So making sure we partner on who's responsible for different components of parent technology, parent training, and communication to make sure that students are supported really no matter where it comes from. And then I do agree that the most critical component for us here has been family communication and engagement. Families are always seen as critical partners, but now more than ever, there's that line has been blurred. Sometimes we might have had conversations around educational impact and which behaviors need to be addressed at home because they're not presenting at school. And now we're seeing some of those things that parents have told us about, and it is impacting education. So again, making sure we know who's providing the training or the resources in each of those areas, and having clear and consistent expectations for family involvement in continuous education, and knowing who's going to do that. So what components of family communication or family access is the non-public going to handle versus the LEA? Hearing parent concerns and collaborating to address those. And again, we've been doing that most frequently through parent training. That could be in reading strategies or ABA or whatever that needs to look like. Home behavior support plans that collaborate between home and school and have a clear plan to approach any behaviors that are impacting access. And then again, just making sure that parents consistently have the technology support and training that they need to make sure students are engaged on a regular basis. And that is pretty much what I had for the LEA side, just kind of running through those pillars and how we've approached them with our partners.
Great, thank you, Samantha. And I'll thank you both, Patrick and Samantha, for really sharing your perspectives and, to kind of bring it back and tie it into, the pillars for continuous education from the guiding principles. What I heard was, some really nice examples of, under all three of these pillars, in terms of high expectations for how instruction was going to be delivered, how students got feedback on their work, how LEAs got feedback on students' work, and really creative ways of addressing attendance issues and concerns in this kind of COVID posture. In terms of equity and access, really understanding that the whole student supports that students need encompasses not just taking into account how services are going to be delivered to students, but also what supports their families may need, what supports the LEA may need, or how they can get information to support their learner, even though the non-public is providing the direct instruction, but also technology challenges. I heard about, and I think we have all heard, access to technology, kind of problem solving, not just who has access, who has the equipment, but also how to use it in the ways that make the most sense, not just for the student, but their families as well. And really from both Patrick and Samantha, family engagement, how to partner with the family, communicate in ways that are helpful to give parents expectations and resources that they need to support their children, but also LEAs as well. One of the things that I heard from both Patrick and Samantha that I think really underscored the importance of that collaborative process was just early communication, lots of communication to understand and identify who's going to be responsible for what, and how those activities will be undertaken. OSSI in the past, my non-public team have worked and developed some resources in terms of MOAs, memoranda of agreement, to really kind of help outline the areas in which non-publics and LEAs should be partnering to really do the work of supporting students. So I encourage you to visit the OSSE website, and again, there'll be resources at the end of this presentation to look at MOAs, because this is another time to kind of plug that, having those collaborative processes outlined and established ahead of time really help to identify the important areas and who will be covering, what respective roles.
And Edgar, if I could add one more thing, I just want to make sure, Patrick and I may have made this sound a little like sunshine and rainbows. So just wanted to be candid that, some of this was also, it was born out of challenge. And, when I initially reached out to Patrick in the spring, it's because I had reviewed what Kennedy Krieger had shared and had to politely tell him, like, this isn't going to work for my kid. And so I think knowing your students at non-publics well enough to know if something's going to be effective for them and if you think that's going to constitute FAPE, and then being clear, I didn't read the plan and go, what a shame, Kennedy Krieger, I don't think they've caught every nuance of my kid. I called and I asked, and Patrick's response was, well, then what would work and how can we do it? And that was really kind of a months-long effort. So that would be my main thing, is if you come up against challenges or communication challenges, or you read that plan and it seems vague, please reach out to your non-public partners, because they're so willing to have these conversations, but sometimes they are looking for the LEA to kind of help them figure out where the gaps might be or where things aren't so clear.
Thank you, Samantha. And I think that really underscores a couple of additional points. And LEA should have their own set of kind of student progress monitoring expectations that should guide this process. And you certainly articulated that having those expectations helps you with that lens on to review Kennedy Krieger's plan and say, hey, there are some things that may need to be different from what I know about my student. And again, the collaborative process. I even know about this process is because both Samantha and Patrick copied me and members of my team when they were having these conversations, which really kind of helped to make sure that we were in the loop about it, but also that we were able to see what was going on as they were collaborating with each other. So I encourage you to loop in your OSSE non-public monitors as you're having conversations with the LEA or with the non-public, and you're doing your regular collaboration, the thing that we'd expect that you all should be doing on an active and regular basis. Okay, so I'm going to pause at this point to see if we have any additional questions that come in before we move on. Oh, there is a question from before. Let me, while you are kind of thinking about any questions that you have for Patrick or for Samantha, I will read this from previously. So if a parent does not want the same level of services during distance learning because this imposes a burden on them, the IEP team needs to amend the IEP so to reflect the temporary reduction in services. The short answer would be yes. In the context of an IEP team with members of that IEP team who have relevant input into those decisions, the IEP team should be then amending the IEP as is determined by the members of the team to reflect any changes, whether it's a reduction in services or, like I said before, an addition. Okay. Doesn't look like we have any new questions coming in. So I wanted to just move on and direct your attention to resources. We're going to be covering safety measures later on, but some of the guidance documents that I want to call your attention to include for general health and safety guidance on the OSCE website, there are 3 documents, including an FAQs. We've gotten a number of questions that have come from our stakeholders reviewing these documents, particularly about groupings of students and the number of students. This document was really kind of written with a kind of lens of, what instruction and school operations look like within an LEA setting. And, our questions, rightly so from non-publics and our non-public stakeholders have, really kind of inquired, like, to what degree that these health and safety guidelines, refer to and apply to their respective, circumstances in non-public settings. And really the take-home answer is the collaboration between the non-public and the LEA should really be informing that process along with these health and safety guidelines. So when it comes to things like grouping, again, what makes sense for our DC students in non-public schools, should be determined by the collaboration between the non-public and the LEA. DC overall has a coronavirus guidance webpage that you'll see here. If you click on those links at the coronavirus COVID-19 resource page, and as I'm sure all of you know, that there are CDC resources, both as it relates to kind of coronavirus overall, but also looking specifically in education and childcare settings. So I direct your attention to those as well. As I said, the contact information that we have here is for the respective presenters, from OSCE. I didn't include Samantha Lincoln or Patrick Say's contact information. If folks are interested, please send me it. You can use the chat or the questions, and I'm happy to direct those inquiries to Patrick and Samantha respectively. So as I said, additional resources, the guidance resources for COVID-19 related concerns, when it comes to closure and recovery, the resource document is here, and that link will take you to it, along with a newly developed special education resource hub that OSCE has recently published in the last, at the beginning of school. And it's really geared more to families and students, for this year. So we really encourage you. It's a lot of interesting, informative, and accessible information that parents and families, really written in kind of plain language, for our parents and students to make use of as it relates to answering the kind of questions and concerns that they may have, with regard to their children's education. So that brings us to the end of the presentation. We only ended up using 60 minutes of our 90-minute allotted time, and I'm going to keep open the questions, as long as folks are raising questions. But again, we've come to the end of our formal presentation, so we'll entertain some questions and take it from there, and then give you time back should we end early. Questions come in. Is a recording available? I missed a portion due to testing duties at a school. Yes, so in addition to the slide deck that you'll get a copy of, in the near future, we will publish, as we always do with our presentations here on the non-public team, we will publish it to a recorded audio version to the OSCE website as well. That will also apply to this afternoon session, from 1 to 2:30. So once those recordings are housed on the OSCE website, you'll receive notification from me about that. So it doesn't look like there are any more questions that have come in. So give it another 30 seconds or so, and we thank you for participating in this morning's webinar. We look forward to your participation at the afternoon session that we'll be back here at 1 o'clock to present. I would just like to say thank you at this time to all of my presenters, LaShonda Wilson, who's a member of our non-public monitoring team, and Samantha Lincoln from Inspired Teaching Demonstration School, and Patrick Say from Kennedy Krieger Schools as well. So thank you very much. And this concludes our webinar for this morning.